Well, guys, you caught me without my ears in. Sometimes when you do these podcasts, you got a lot of moving parts, and sometimes the moving part gets laid aside and you forget to do it. So here I am just doing a little pre show thing here and see if I can get this thing where it doesn't choke me here. Part of the problem with wearing these ear pods or listening devices, they're called in-ear monitors, I think, is I also wear hearing aids, and so it all gets in the way. So anyway, hey, it's 5 o'clock. Actually, it's 5:01, and we are live on YouTube and Facebook. And I'm supposed to run this thing, so hang on. Welcome to Senior Moments. I'm Tommy Ellison. I forget names, car keys, and what I came in the room for, but somehow I remember the 60s with crystal clear clarity. What you are about to hear is evidence of a misspent youth, and believe me, I've got some stories. Let's go. Okay, now I'm back. The show today is called Heading West, and I gotta be honest with you. Typically, I do some kind of a script when I do these things, and I'm not scripting this one. I've got just a couple of notes jotted down on a sticky note here, just in case I get off base too far and in the weeds. But I appreciate you watching, those of you who are live, and of course, those of you who are watching on the replay, both of you. I appreciate you being a part of the show here today. So, you probably may be wondering about what I mean by headed west. Well, here's the deal. I had the opportunity, I guess I was maybe 8, 10 years old, somewhere in that neighborhood. And my grandmother wanted to go to Houston, Texas to see her oldest daughter and her kids. And they had moved from Birmingham to Houston several years earlier. And so she was missing them. You know how that works, grandmas. And so she asked me, and I'm not sure why. I guess it's because I was probably the oldest of the grandkids at that moment in time. She had 10 children, and the two that were in Texas, I was basically number 3 as far as age is concerned. So anyway, she asked me if I wanted to go to Houston and to see her daughter and family. So I said, sure. And this was during the summer. School was out. And the exciting thing about it was I felt like, this was going to be an exciting trip, but I was a little apprehensive because my grandmother had this little bitty tiny car that she drove to Mass into the grocery store. And that was about the extent of her travel there in the city of Fairfield where we grew up. And so then she tells me, and this was the good news, that we were going to fly. And this was, of course, my first time to fly, and it was her first time to fly. So there was a lot of mutual apprehension, I guess, going on, but probably more so than for her than me, because, hey, flying for a 10-year-old, that's like an adventure, right? We fly off the handlebars of the bicycles, but we don't get to fly in the sky like, wow, there's an airplane. Anyway, you get the point. So I'm getting ready to go to Houston with her, and so and it's really weird what I remember about this trip, because we went to the airport, and the um, the plane back then, this had to have been like 1961, maybe 62. There weren't jet engine airplanes then. Well, I'm sure there were, but not passenger planes, or at least the ones in Birmingham weren't, because this was one of those old turboprop, with the propellers. I think it was four engines on the wings, and so we boarded the plane, and we got out on the runway, and Grandma was holding my hand. I thought she was going to squeeze my fingers off. She was so nervous, and I was excited. And so, I mean, hey, it was the first time flying. Do you remember that feeling, that emotion, the first time you ever flew? So we fly to Houston. We get off. We get picked up by her family and my cousins, Chuck and Aaron and David. David was the younger of the three. And we go out to Shadowwood Drive in Houston to visit my cousins. And we were going to be out there 2 weeks. Now, I don't know if it was because my mother or grandmother wanted to stay 2 weeks, or if they had invited her to stay and she got talked into it, or, it could be it was just she took two weeks to debrief and to deprogram herself over flying, and prepping herself for the flight home maybe took 2 weeks. I don't know. But in this case, it really didn't matter, because about a week into the trip, I'm having a ball with my cousins out there in Texas. And, well, my dad calls. And if you remember, 1961, it was like a long distance call. It wasn't like a cell phone where you picked it up and you dial anywhere in the world for whatever your cell phone cost you. It was a long distance call from my dad. And now, just to set the stage here, my dad was a deputy sheriff here in Jefferson County, and he had been asked by the sheriff to go to San Francisco to extradite a prisoner. And the prisoner's name, I'll get into that later. But anyway, he called me and he said, "Hey, do you want to go to San Francisco with me?" Well, immediately I thought he was going to fly out there, pick me up, and we were going to fly to San Francisco, which was kind of exciting. And I said, "Sure." And then he tells me, he says, "Well, I'm gonna drive to San Francisco, and so when I come through that part of Texas, I'll pick you up and we'll go. We'll go to San Francisco. Just take our time." Now, I don't really know if my dad had ever flown before that. I'm thinking he might, because it seems like when he was a deputy sheriff, he had a partner named Bill Adams. And Bill had a pilot's license. And he and my dad had an airplane. And I don't know if it was a joint venture ownership or if it was Bill's airplane, but Bill and my dad, would get in that airplane, and being law enforcement people, they would fly down on the Warrior River looking for stills, moonshiners. And when they spotted one, they would kind of map it out and then come back, and they would know where to come back to bust those stills up in these days of, illegal liquor and all that. So anyway, with all that said, I'm not so sure how excited my dad was about flying on a big airplane, so he decided he was going to drive. He kind of reminded me, there was a preacher one time that was going to the airport, and he was buying a ticket back when you just could walk up and buy a ticket. And the person attending the ticket counter there kind of sensed the fact that he was nervous, the preacher was, and she said, why are you so nervous? And he said, well, I've never, flown before. And the lady was looking at his driver's license, and it said the Reverend, you know, Fred Jones. And she said, well, you're a reverend, huh? And he said, yeah. And so she said, well, Reverend, I would have thought, that maybe you could have latched onto that promise that, the Lord made, that he was with us always, even when we fly. And the preacher looked at her and said, that's not what it said. What it says is, lo, I am with you always. So maybe that's where my dad was coming from. He thought he would just soon drive. Maybe he was making mileage on the deal. I don't know. But he came and got me. We loaded up all the luggage that I had, which wasn't much, a few changes of clothes, and we headed west down through the rest of Texas. Took us 2 days to drive across Texas. And then we went into New Mexico, and then we went into Arizona. And I remember when we crossed into the border of California, there on the eastern border of California, it was a very desolate desert area. There was a sign there that said, welcome to hell, population 25. So we stopped, and I remember having he made a picture of me standing by that sign. And I wish I had that picture. It's gotten lost in the, so many years of, fooling around and moving and all. So, but I can remember distinctly that picture and that little village there of 25 called Hell, California. Maybe some of you have been there. But with all that said, here we are driving across the United States, just, Dad and his son. And I'm sure I was probably just jabbering away. I can remember, stopping at some country western store, and my dad was wanting to buy a Stetson cowboy hat. And he did. But while I was there in the country western store, there was a set of bull horns, the longhorn style bull horns like they have out west. And I remember I talked him into buying a set of those for me and put them in the trunk. And when I got home, he nailed them up above the door of my bedroom there on Hillside Drive. So that was one of the souvenirs I guess I got from that trip. And so we proceeded on into California, and then we hung a right and headed north to San Francisco to pick up a gentleman by the name of Carl Henry Washington. And Carl Henry was out in California, but there was a warrant for his arrest in Alabama. And so my dad was charged with the transportation of that prisoner back to Alabama. And I can remember, and I don't know why these little details stay with me, but my dad had the paperwork, the extradition paperwork to give to the authorities there in the San Francisco courthouse. And I remember on the very last page, it was a legal document, and it was signed by the governor in, blue ink, and you rub your finger across it and it would smear, so it just wasn't like an auto pen kind of thing. We won't even go there about auto pens these days. But it was John Patterson was the governor. And actually, when all this was said and done, my dad kept those paperwork, and I kept them as a souvenir because I had John Patterson, the governor's souvenir. I don't have any idea who he was at that time. I just knew he was governor, and I had his autograph on an extradition paper. Well, here's where it kind of got interesting, because in this trip that we were taking, I'm sitting in the front seat. I'm sure I was probably just chatterbox city, talking to my dad, asking questions. He had never been out west before, to my knowledge. Not, if he had, it'd probably been years earlier. And so we get to the San Francisco courthouse, the county courthouse where he was being held, and we get him. And here's the deal: I had to sit in the back seat. My dad had an Oldsmobile, like a 55, 56 Oldsmobile that he drove, and so I had to sit in the back seat, and the prisoner, old Carl Henry, would sit on the passenger side. But my dad had this real thick, stiff leather belt that had a buckle that held it together like a regular belt. But on the very back of the belt, there was a big stainless steel circle, a disc, I guess. There wouldn't be a collar. It was like a ring. A ring's what it was. Sorry. And this is unscripted, remember. And so this ring was on the back of the belt. So when he put the belt on the prisoner and he had the buckle in the back, then he would put his handcuffs through that ring so that the prisoner was literally sitting there handcuffed. But he had enough slack, in the belt that he could raise his hands and eat when it was necessary or smoke a cigarette. And so that was the mechanism by which he was going to keep that prisoner from escaping. And you say, well, he could have gotten out and run, but no, because my daddy had taken a cable off of a trolling motor on his boat that had two, buckles, two latches, and he put one latch on the seat, underneath the seat where the seat suspension was tied to the body of the car, and he put the other end of that cable on that ring, on the buckle, so that if the man started to run, that cable, of course, would suppress that pretty quickly. So that was the method by which we were transporting this prisoner. Now, think about it. We're in San Francisco, and we're a good 4 to 5 days away. And of course, by that time, my dad was tired of driving, so he would drive probably 12, maybe 14 hours every day. And I got a lot of nap time in the back seat. But, it wasn't like I was leaning up on the seat and talking to my dad during the trip back, because I've got this prisoner sitting there, in the front seat, passenger seat, and a million things are going through my mind because I'm wondering, well, I wonder what he did. Why is he going back? What's he getting tried for? What was his crime? Did he kill anybody? Was it a murder? Was it what? And I think it was actually car theft or grand larceny of some sort that went to the trouble of extraditing him from California. But it was a long drive. But I remember, and this is the crazy thing about this, I'll never understand my dad, but my dad loved to trade cars. He practically lived at Limbaugh Chevrolet over on Avenue E in Inslee. And my mom would say he would trade cars when the ashtrays got full. There's a little bit of a hyperbole there, but he loved to trade cars. And I don't remember how this happened, but we were in a little town, I think it was Hot Springs, Arkansas, and there was a Rambler dealership there. And I don't know if the car that Dad was driving was having issues or if he just decided that he would look at this Rambler station wagon. It was kind of a flesh tone color. Wasn't anything exotic or exciting about it. It was a 4-seat station wagon. Rambler, if those of you who remember Ramblers, it wasn't like the GTOs or the muscle cars. It was just plain Jane, stripped down. I think it had manual windows. because my dad always thought electric windows were not good because it's just something else to break. That was his philosophy about automating different practices and stuff in the car itself. But well, this is he trades cars. He gives them the Cadillac or the Oldsmobile, and now we're loading up in that Nash Rambler that would take us the rest of the way to Birmingham. And again, I have no clue. We got some folks that are popping up on the screen here. I probably need to chat with them here for just a second. Got Willie Bice comes up and he says, "Hey Tommy, Willie, I hope you're doing well out there in Texas." Now, you might have been fooled by the title. It doesn't mean I'm heading west now. This was back 50 something, 60 years ago. But I didn't know you were living in Texas, I knew you were in Texas, but I didn't know you were in Houston. Hey, Susan, sorry about your sick child, and you aren't really late, I don't think, and you haven't really missed much, to be honest with you. And of course, my sister is always good to come in and share her thoughts. She said, "I swear only our dad would think it was a good idea to bring back an extradited prisoner with a child along for the ride." Yeah, that's probably true, Anna. That is so probably true. Well, thinking about that Nash Rambler, he always kind of referred to that as the Arkansas Rambler because that's where he got the car. And anyway, Carl Henry Washington was extradited back to Alabama, back to Birmingham, back to the Jefferson County Courthouse, and all was well with the world. But I had a ball. I mean, what could possibly be better for an 11-year-old, 10-year-old, however old I was, to take a trip like that with your dad and see the world. And that old commercial, I think it was a Chevrolet commercial. "See the USA in your Chevrolet." You remember that commercial? If you do, you're old. But aren't we all here? But anyway, that was kind of my senior moment for the day. And in hindsight, or maybe retrospect, I don't really know what magnitude there is in telling this story other than to say I'm just getting it out there. Maybe one day while they're stumbling around on the internet, my grandkids will find this story and know a little bit more about my growing up in Fairfield and this senior moment that I'm having. So anyway, I don't know who else is watching, but if you would like to leave a comment, if you've ever been to California, I'd be interested to know if you've ever been to Hell, California. That was, I mean, it wasn't hardly anything there. The sign that said welcome was on the same post that said come back and see us. Not really, but it wasn't a big town, okay? It wasn't a big town. So, and to your point, Anna, our dad did a lot of strange things when you think about it. I can remember him showing a pistol to our half brother, Robin, and Robin wasn't what I would call a gunslinger. He didn't have a lot of interest in guns like my dad did because he was a deputy sheriff. But Robin was cocking it. My dad said, "Now remember, it's loaded," and he pulled the hammer back on it, and he was going to let it back down easily. And for those of you who have ever let a hammer down on a loaded gun, you have to be careful because you're holding the hammer and pulling the trigger at the same time and allowing that hammer to come back down, on the shell slowly so as not to set it off. And lo and behold, that hammer got away from Robin and bam, right, and then we were sitting in the house, and he missed the television set by, I don't know, 6 or 8 inches, went into the wall, loud. It was, it was, it was quite an evening. My sister has a good memory here. She says, um, let's see if I can pull that back up again. Let's do it this way. I remember Dad showing me photos from a murder scene. Wow, you'll have to fill us in on that one, Anna. But he was always up to something. I remember him bringing home, or he drove his squad car home, and I'm sitting in the not the back seat. I'm got my stories confused here. We were, living on 42nd Street in Fairfield, and he pulls up in the backyard, parking his squad car, done for the day, and he's getting something out of the trunk. And there in the trunk, he said, "Let me show you something." And I said, "Okay." And so walked over to the car, and he opens the trunk, and there is a box about 15 inches square and maybe about 8 or 10 inches deep, and it's burnt human bones. It's like leg bones and, fingers and arm bones and a skull, but you could tell it had burned. And he said it was a remains of someone who had died in the fire, and they found him dead out in the woods. And I don't know if it was a murder case or just, I don't know. I don't know where the backstory was on the bones, but there they were in the trunk of his car. And my dad was a little bit of a practical joker. In fact, he was a big-time practical joker. Now that I don't have to think about it. I lived through it. But he looked at me and he said, I think if it's okay with you, I'm going to put these under your bed tonight and keep them there till in the morning. I don't want to leave them out here in the trunk. And he's with a straight face saying all this. And, of course, I'm thinking to myself, you ain't no way you're going to keep these bones underneath my bed tonight. What are you talking about, But that was my dad. He was a bit of a practical joker. He really was a practical joker. I remember one day he opened the trunk, and there was a rubber radiator hose, I don't know, about 18 inches long. It was a radiator hose. And I said, "Hey, Dad, what's that?" And he said, "It's a lie detector." Law enforcement was a little different back then. Maybe a little more stringent than certainly it is now. But I got the message. Believe me, being the son of a deputy sheriff, I learned to live at the foot of the cross, because I figured if I ever got in trouble, he'd leave me in jail just to teach me a lesson. And he worked in juvenile court for a number of years, so we always saw the worst of the worst. And his theory was that you couldn't trust a boy any further than you see him sitting at the table with both hands on the table. He just had a sincere problem. Well, not a problem, but he said his daily-to-day exposure to juvenile delinquents and all that they do and all that entails certainly influenced his bringing me up. He wasn't mean to me. He wasn't abusive. And of course, by today's standards, maybe threatening to put bones under the bed would be considered emotional abuse. I don't know. Maybe that explains a lot of things about me. I'm not sure. But anyway, he was a mess, but he was a practical joker. We had a neighbor, and again, I'm unscripted here. I'm just roaming around in my mind thinking about some of this stuff. But we had a neighbor. Her name was Alice Kinderdine. And for those of you who grew up in Fairfield that might be watching, you probably remember Vicky Kinderdine. She was a few years younger than me, but she was a student there at Fairfield. But her mother, Alice, and her husband, who I think's name was George, had 3 kids. There was Vicky, and seems like there was a George Jr. that was a young one, and then there was a Ray Alice, which was the oldest sister of the kids. But with all that said, they also had a Great Dane in the yard, and the Great Dane's name was Babe. And of course, if you know Great Danes, you know they are big, big dogs. And so when the Great Dane would get to barking, it would always bother Dad. But anyway, it was something that he not only played practical jokes on people, and I could tell you another half dozen of them, but he loved to mess with animals as well. And we would go to the zoo sometimes, and he would get an empty popcorn box, the square rectangular popcorn boxes, cardboard that they put popcorn in. You remember those. And he would get an empty one out of the garbage can, and he would walk over to where all of the little squirrel monkeys were in a cage, and there was a little gate there, or a little fence that prevented you from getting too close to the cage, but you were probably 3 foot, maybe 4 foot away. And my dad would walk over there with that empty popcorn box, and he would reach down into it and pantomime eating popcorn. You can picture that. Looking at these squirrel monkeys in the cage. And then the squirrel monkeys, seeing him eating the popcorn, would come over to the front of the cage and start reaching through as if to say, feed me. And my dad would hold the box out there, and when the monkey reached in to get the popcorn, he would squeeze the box down to grab hold of the hand of the monkey. Of course, the monkey starts squealing and screaming and jumping up and down in the cage because he can't get his hand out of the box. And my dad got in big trouble one day. In fact, I thought they were going to throw him out of the zoo for messing with the animals. But that was he just loved to aggravate. So back to Babe. Babe loved to bark and was a big barker. He made a lot of noise. When Babe was barking, the whole neighborhood knew about it. But my dad took this piece of wood and kind of carved it down into what looked like half of an airplane propeller. And he tied a leather thong on one end of it so that he could swing it around. And when he swung it, it would make this noise that sounded like woo, 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 woo. You get the picture? And it kind of sounded like a dog growling. And he would get on the other side of the house and swing that woo, woo. And Babe would start barking in the backyard on the opposite side of the house. And of course, whenever Babe would bark just for no particular reason, Alice Kinderdine would come out and start screaming at him to shut up. And then the dog would shut up. Alice would go back inside, and that was my dad's cue to repeat. And he would swing that thing, get that Babe to barking again, and Alice would come out even angrier than she was before. And he just thought that was the greatest pastime in all the world, because he got to mess with an animal and a person all at one time. He was a mess. He was a mess. And I know, Anna, you would agree with me, although maybe he had mellowed out a little bit by the time you came. Anna was 10 years younger than me and was the baby of our family. So anyway, for those of you who are watching, wake up. I'm about done. I think I'm going to call it a day. Willie's back here. He says, I live 2 doors down from the Kinderdines, and Babe bit me on the leg while riding my bicycle in the front of their house. Yeah. That reminds me of another story. Dad raised dogs, and at one time we had like 18 or 19 bird dogs in a little dog run in the back of our house that he built, chain link fence. And one of the reasons why I never got really attached to any one dog was because about the time I learned the dog's name and got friendly with it, he'd trade it off for a gun or another dog or, some other thing that caught his attention. And he was always trading things. And we always had a dog, and many times multiple dogs. He had a German Shepherd that rode with him in his squad car. That dog, his name was Nicky. It was midnight black in color. And that was a beautiful dog, but a dog that was well trained. And this was Birmingham, so I don't have to tell you about dogs. But nevertheless, where was I going with that story? He had dogs, but we had a bird dog that had a litter of puppies there one day, and Dad picked up one of those little puppies, and the eyes were still closed, cute little thing, big old kind of pink nose, and walked over to the fence where Babe was and was going to show Babe the puppy. And when he reached over and got about 6 inches away from the fence, Babe jumped at the dog and bit at the dog, and Daddy snatched him back almost in time to clear him, but Babe caught him right by the ear, and he cut off half of it, or bit off half of his ear. And I thought if my dad had been wearing a pistol, which he typically was, but he wasn't that day, if he had been wearing a pistol, he probably would have shot and killed Babe right there on the spot, because it just ticked him off that dog would bite the ear off of his new bird dog. And he always said, if I remember correctly, he kept that dog a while and always claimed that dog with the half ear was a pretty dadgum good bird hunting dog. So anyway, all right, I'm going to try to leave a second time. I appreciate you watching today. I appreciate those of you, Willie and Anna and Susan, and hanging in there with me today. I'm sorry I'm rambling a little bit, but, sometimes you just got to ramble from time to time. And speaking of ramble, I wanted to tell you about the Rambler that my dad got. So anyway. All right, my friends, I'm going to get out of here, go grab some supper. I hope all of you have a great week coming up. And, we've got this obligatory little closing that you have to watch. So stand by, listen to this guy. He's really smart. He's going to give you some instruction, and I agree with everything he says. We'll see you next time on Senior Moments, Evidence of a Misspent Youth. And today was no exception. Y'all take care, and I love you all. Well, hey, thanks for spending a few minutes with me on Senior Moments. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure and tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll be back soon with more stories from a misspent youth, and maybe some of yours too.